Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We are part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee, back after almost a month's worth of absence. I've had open heart surgery and have been just trying to get over that. Don't know how regular the podcast will be in the next couple of weeks, as I just frankly get over a health issue that's going to require a lot of rest. But I had the energy to do one today, and with the postseason on the horizon, I felt like it was a good and appropriate time. So I hope you enjoy what we have put out today. Chip Frederick is our guest. He appears on our guest line, which is sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Now on to our podcast with Chip Frederick. Chip Frederick joins me today. It is Tuesday. It's been almost a month since we did a podcast. A lot has happened with Vanderbilt baseball and with me since we last did this. But Chip, thanks for joining us today. This is always the most fun and interesting time of the year.
It is, Chris, and I hope, first of all, I know the people on this who listen to this regularly, and I know there's a lot, and there are a lot of people who don't comment, want to know how you're doing, and we're happy to hear your voice, and I know you've been through a lot, and maybe just now that you have this forum, just maybe give us a couple minutes to how you're doing, because I know a lot of people are concerned, and I'm glad you made it out the other end, and I know it has not been a fun experience, but one that I know you're glad you had it done, right? I mean, it was a scary time for you, but I'm glad you're kind of making your way out on the other end.
Yeah, it was. For background for people, for about 2 years, I've not been feeling myself. You can probably even hear it a little bit in my voice today as I'm recovering from all this, but for about 2 years, my energy has really been lacking, and I like to run. I'm not fanatical about it, but if I could run 20 miles a week, I would. And, running a couple miles at a time has never been an issue for me. Even when I don't run for a few weeks, I can get up and do it a lot of times. And it got to a point to where running 1 or 2 tenths of a mile, and not even at the pace that I do it, was just beyond taxing. I'd be bent over, gasping for breath. Little things like going up the stairs in the house, it just left me so winded and sometimes lightheaded. And I had my yearly physical the day Vanderbilt season opened, and my doctor had spotted a heart murmur. And as they dug down deeper in the coming weeks, came to find out I had a defective heart valve that I was born with. And after a while, calcium builds up on the layers of that valve. What it was is the valve coming out of my aorta has 2 flaps instead of 3, and then you get a layer of calcium built up on that, and then it makes it really hard for blood to flow through your heart. Once the doctors figure out what the problem was, usually a year or two from when you start finding symptoms, or 2 or 3 years, and I've had them for probably 2. If you don't get them treated, you'll die. And so I probably had a longer runway for surgery than the time in which I chose it. But once it gets to be kind of a life or death thing, I didn't want to mess around. I didn't want to sit and ponder heart surgery all summer and have that to think about. I just wanted to get done and over with, even though it just, in terms of professional timing, it couldn't have been worse. But I wanted to get it done. I wanted to take care of it. And I'm probably supposed to be resting a little bit more than I should. But that explains why we haven't done one of these in a month. I'll probably ease back into it a little bit here and there. But I'm feeling better. I am now 3.5 weeks out of surgery. I can still feel it in my chest. I think anytime they cut your chest open, you're going to feel it a while. And I'm told I'm probably not going to feel normal till November or December. But praise God for good doctors. St. Thomas is a phenomenal place. If you ever have heart issues, I can't recommend them enough. I've had a lot of people reach out to me in texts and messages and things, and I appreciate all those things. But yeah, I'm feeling better. It's still going to be a long road to recovery, but I can't wait to feel the way that I used to feel before this problem popped up. And even though it's going to be a few months in getting there, it just has affected my energy so much the last few years. You can see the number of podcasts we put out compared to what we used to do. I think that had a lot to do with my own energy to do or not do things. And to get this corrected and everything else with my health is great. So it was just a matter of fixing this. And I think once this is, I'm recovered. It takes your heart about 6 weeks to 80% recover. And again, I'm about halfway there. But I'm looking forward to life on the other side. And thank you for asking.
Yeah. And you mentioned the calcium situation. The calcium. I know there's a test, and I had it done a couple years ago, a calcium scoring test.
Yeah.
Did you have that done? Because I know it's really inexpensive. I mean, it's like a $50, $60, $70 test. I know there's one on White Bridge Road here locally in Nashville that you can go and get done. Is that where you kind of determined that calcium situation? Because I've heard of that before. And it's just it takes like 10 minutes to go. It's an inpatient. You go in and set up an appointment. Is that where you have that done? Or
no, the funny thing is they did that a year and a half ago with me when I started complaining, and that's in your arteries, and my arteries were fine. So that was the puzzling thing, was that when you looked at the arteries and everything, there were no blockages, no buildup or anything. It's all on that valve, but that test does not detect the valve issue.
Okay.
They had to do that with basically an ultrasound, and that's when they found the valve to be defective in the middle of March, right when the NCAA tournament was playing. And once they narrowed that down and started looking at that, they found stuff with me that nobody knew I had been dealing with, but it explained a lot. So yeah, that was the diagnosis that put me on this path.
Well, I guess the moral of the story is, if there is one, and probably some advice you can give people is, look, guys and gals, if you're not feeling good, do something about it, right? I mean,
yeah.
If this is something that I think you mentioned in a post, that if you had not detected it, you might not be with us right now. So
yeah.
It's something that I think a lot of people put off stuff, especially during COVID. They put off, preventative care and just routine maintenance of your body and your health. And I guess that's probably something you would express, right? I mean, you just don't put stuff off.
Yeah, two things. I think if I'd lived a sedentary lifestyle, this would have been harder to detect because they would have blamed shortness of breath and things on that. But fortunately, just the act of trying to run in those things and being capable of it, those pointed to this is not a normal situation. And yeah, I think what you said is accurate. If you don't feel right, keep pressing. For a couple years, I just kept saying I don't feel right, and nobody could find anything. And COVID got blamed because I've been through that a couple times. Not in a bad case, but fortunately, I had good doctors. I had a good physician who spotted the big issue, and here we are moving on. Speaking of moving on,
yeah,
Vanderbilt moving on with its season. Processing the last few weeks was really difficult for me because when you've covered a team for 20 years, it seems like there's always a point of reference. Like this season is similar to that one, and this follows a pattern that we saw before, and the patterns with them have been pretty consistent for a decade. They start playing their best ball middle to end of May, and then it goes into June, and they just keep getting better. This one was unlike anything I've ever seen, where they played their worst ball at the end of the year, and it just was hard to get your arms around that when you've seen something that's been so different for so long.
Yeah, it's been a very topsy-turvy year, Chris, and one that's you mentioned is unusual as there's been in his Tim Corbin's tenure here. I think there have been years that they've set SEC records with number of wins and a record that looked like it was in danger this year of being broken by Tennessee. It wasn't. There have been years that it's kind of been an upward climb, as you mentioned, towards the end of the year, and that's happened more than it hasn't happened. towards that, late April, May push that a Tim Corbin coach team is known for. This year started off, as you said, and I'm not talking past tense here, but just to summarize where we are. I can remember when we did a pod after the Oklahoma State series when they lost 2 out of 3, and you mentioned to me that, we talked afterwards that we thought Oklahoma State was very, very good, which they are, and they've proven that. And that was a tough way to come out of the chute early on. But you mentioned to me then in the press conference afterwards that I think Tim's really not upset about this as much as he would normally be, because he thinks that Oklahoma State's really good, and thus he thinks he has a pretty good team himself, and that remains to be seen. Then they roll off, 17, 18 wins in a row and at the early point of the season, just, going to Hawaii, taking 4 games and skipping along. And then things, they win their first series against Missouri at home, sweep them. And then for the first time, they face adversity in Game 2 after wiping South Carolina off the face of the map on a Friday night game 10-0. They finally lose 8-2 in Game 2. Carter Holton takes the loss and gets hit up pretty early. And then it's just been up and down the bouncing ball ever since. I mean, Tennessee comes in here and sweeps and go to Auburn and lose 2 out of 3, but have a game in between where they scored 19 runs in Game 2. It's just been a year of this team trying to find their identity, trying to find their leaders. Not sure who those leaders are if you're looking from 30,000 feet up. Having some inconsistencies with some players that you didn't really think would have those kind of years. Really not having a dominant pitcher that you call a number one. There's various opinions that could be thrown out there as far as who that is, and at different points of the season. You got a kid on your staff in Christian Little who, if you look 4 months ago, before the season started, you say that guy's going to be in the rotation, got to be in the rotation with his the arm that he has. He has some issues early on, some confidence issues. He gets sat out for a series. So there's been sort of this situation all year long of uncertainty, which for a guy like Tim Corbin, who preaches consistency and has had that throughout his tenure more than he has not, it has to be a head scratcher. I think the most, when you hear the guys in the SEC network doing the SEC tournament and they're talking about Vanderbilt, at one point Chris Burke just said, who's the color analyst, played at Tennessee, but he's pretty frank, and I trust his opinion, 95% of the time. It's just not been a model year for Vanderbilt, what they're used to. And when you don't have that, and you're the teams like Alabama football, and you're the teams that have been dominant, and a team like Vanderbilt that's gone to Omaha as much as they have, has won it over, twice in the most recent years. At least if they haven't won it, they've been there a lot more than they haven't. And when that slows down and normalcy happens, which in a crazy, weird year that this has been with some more parity in the conference, it causes everybody to take a step back and say, what are the reasons, what are the causes? But that's where they are. They have baseball to be played. Here they can do whatever they want to do with it and put their minds to it. But they got a tougher road than they usually have had in the past, and it starts this weekend at Oregon State.
I have been pretty consistent, in my opinion, all year that this was a really good baseball team. I was probably alone in that through most of the season. One thing that I look at is run differential. When you're plus 30-something in SEC play, you're a good baseball team, maybe a great baseball team. And it just was really weird to me I felt like all the facts like that supported the argument, even if the fans didn't believe it. And then the last 2 weeks, the wheels just fall off, starting with that LSU series. Now, you can go back to that and you can pinpoint some things. I think Carter Holton throwing in that series would have made a difference. I'm not saying that was a bad call to hold him. Your pitchers need rest before the NCAA tournament, and he'd had 3 or 4 pretty long outings in a row, so I don't question that move at all. I think their explanation for it would be that it's just a brutally tough league, and sometimes those things happen. I mean, I think it's probably more complicated than that, but talking to someone over there yesterday, that was kind of how they sized it up. But it just was interesting to me that my faith in this team really wasn't shaken until the last 2 weeks, and now I don't know what to think of them. And then on top of that, they got a pretty brutal draw in the regional.
Yeah, and the last time we did this podcast, thinking back on it, was I think we did. Was it?
I think
the
it was the
Kentucky
day
series?
After the Louisville game, perhaps.
Yeah, you're right. And so a lot has happened as we talked about since then. They go to Georgia, they win 2 out of 3. They take 2 out of 3 from Kentucky. A&M came in here and took care of them, which we know that A&M is a really good team. But yeah, if it was after Louisville, yeah, I mean things look pretty good. But taking 2 out of 3 from Georgia, the Arkansas game. Probably the 10-inning game is the pinnacle of that stretch that we haven't talked about, and we're not going to, of course, rehash everything that's happened since then, since the last pod. But my goodness, when you go to the number 4 team, or at the time top 5, they were somewhere in that whatever, depending on the ranking, and Bradfield hits the bomb in the 10th inning, and you take 2 out of 3, you got to like where you are at that point in the season. And then to turn around, beat Middle, and then have LSU just come in after they got swept by Ole Miss and sweep you at home, and you give up just an ungodly amount of runs, 41 runs, I guess it was, in that series, over a 3-game series. It just really it headed into Hoover in a way that was this team and this fan base is not used to. And I think yesterday, though, Chris, if you watch the press conference, and I know you were there, we talked about that. It was not, Corbin's demeanor was pretty much like it has been, where he takes the whole one game at a time, and we're not talking about Oregon State. We're talking about San Diego. You could push play on a recorder and watch that, and that's what he's done for the past 16 years, so to speak. But I kind of got the feeling that it was the main emphasis that he was saying is how difficult this league is and how successful this program has been in the month of June, and what it has done overall as far as the lures of NCAA baseball. I think that, when you talk about how he has built this program, going to the 16th consecutive NCAA tournament, that's an amazing accomplishment considering where the program was when he got here, and where to a level where not hosting is a huge disappointment to his fan base and to his team. More importantly, they're disappointed they're not hosting. That's something you get used to, and that's something that gets in your DNA when you're recruited by Vanderbilt. Is you're certain expectations, and those kids know. There's probably some kids, believe it or not, who read your board or listen to the podcast. But that's an unbelievable accomplishment when you consider it's the best conference in baseball, and you consider who's in this league, and you consider that Mississippi State and North Carolina State are both at home this week, with State winning the national title last year, and they're sitting at home. So, you have some down years, but, I don't see that with all the money that's been poured in around the conference and stadiums and around the country, really. And to think that we've been to the tournament 16 years in a row, nobody else can say that. So I think it was kind of not a campaign, so to speak, but I thought that was an emphasis of his press conference that, look, we're here. We've been here. We're going to stick around. We have we have guys who've played in this tournament. We have a legacy here. And it really takes a long-time Vanderbilt fan and a Vanderbilt follower of this program to realize that how amazing that is. When you've been 8 years, 4 of the last 8 years you've been to Omaha, and you've won 2 national championships and 2 runner-ups during that. So there are very few SEC teams can say that. I can't think of any that can say 16 years in a row with that run. So I kind of felt like that was his theme of that this team, they know what their legacy is. They know what the history of this program is, and they are going to do all they can to defend it. And when you think of it that way and you step outside the box with all the stuff that's happened, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but there's going to be some years that are not as good as the others. And I thought that was the theme of his press conference yesterday.
I'm looking at the teams that got hosting bids. Vanderbilt played 6 of those teams. It went 5-11 against those teams, although I don't think the run differential was as dramatic as the record was. In fact, I think they outscored Auburn in the series. I think the OSU series was a tie. They did outscore Florida and win that series. Louisville was 1-0. I think A&M outscored them, but it wasn't by a ton of runs. And then the Tennessee series, they lost all those by, 4 runs each or whatever. And if you want to throw in LSU, which was, I think, a hosting caliber team, although it didn't get it, then they're 5-14 against those teams. Now, from that point down, I think they played better. They took 2 or 3 against Georgia. They took 2 or 3 against Arkansas. Both of those 2 seeds, played very well against teams that didn't make the tournament. But the dividing line for this team seems to be right now that there's a wall of a type of team that they run up against, that those really great to elite teams were just a hump that they have not gotten over all year.
Yeah, and that has been the theme all year, it seems like. This team is not, I know there's been some talk about how Leiter and Rocker perhaps hid some deficiencies, and there might be some truth to that. When you roll out 2 guys, one of which could possibly be in the big leagues by September, and then Rocker remains to be seen, but just got a world of talent, and he'll get redrafted again, and we hope that his progress is a positive one and he can do the same down the road. But when you can roll 2 guys out there, first round picks, and it tends to make you plug some holes and hide some things that maybe not would be apparent if they weren't out there. And this team, still you've still got the Enrique Bradfields, who can run like the wind and do his thing when he's aggressive on the base paths, and had another great season in that category. But the 6 through 9 spots, really 5 through 9 spots, killed him. And if you look at the SEC stats on the hitting wise, it looks far different than it did last year. Now, there were some deficiencies. We talked about that, and towards the end of the year in the tournament, hitting and not making contact and hitting the ball the other way, that reared its head in Omaha as well, and partially through the NCAA tournament. But yeah, those elite teams, they're constantly reminded by people, which it has a point, that a lot of these teams are older. They took the COVID year. They've had deals where the transfer rules were changed, and you had teams that were at the bottom of the leagues, and there's a lot of places came and found their ways to the top. And I don't think Tim wants to really hear about that. He mentioned yesterday that he's had some guys. Bradfield played in Omaha last year, and Colwick. You got these guys you can name that played there, but and it's just always the performance is not going to be the same from year to year, and you can't count on it in that way. So. It'll be how the NCAA did the tournament and paired it, I would think, and tell me if this is correct, but by being sent to the number 3 team in Oregon State, I guess it means we were one of the lower 2 seeds, right? If that's
that's never been how they've done it, but it seems to be a little bit of how they did it this year. Like, I'll give you for example. A lot of people were projecting Wake Forest to go to Knoxville. And I thought, well, if they do that, that's a real screwing for Tennessee. Wake Forest was, if you looked at predictive computers, like the 6th best team in the country, and that's not a draw that's worthy of the number 1 overall seed. Now, what they did instead was sent Georgia Tech to Knoxville. Tech is a kind of a middle-of-the-road 2 seed, not an extremely tough draw, but not an easy one. No, Tech can hit the heck out of the ball. In fact, Tech averaged as many runs as Tennessee did during the regular season, which is interesting. So just as an aside, keep an eye on that, because stylistically, that'll be an interesting regional. But the point I'm making is they've always done this by geography, but it seemed this year, because you sort of have to do some gymnastics to send Vanderbilt out to Corvallis, given the abundance of nearby options. You had Louisville, North Carolina had been an option, Virginia Tech certainly a lot closer. In fact, I don't know that they could have sent Vanderbilt any further from home than they did. So that was interesting to me. They've not really done it on and an S curve, which I've always argued they should. But it did almost seem like in this case that it was almost like ranking the two seeds and saying, well, if you're a strong one, you're going to get a week or two. And at least in Vanderbilt's case, now that didn't carry across the board. I think Stanford was a team that probably got a tougher draw than it deserved. But it did seem like that's not usually the way it's worked, but it did seem like, at least in Vanderbilt's case, that's more of how it worked this year.
Yeah, and I think in normal years, like with Gonzaga going to Blacksburg,
Miami, or was it Blacksburg?
Virginia Tech, yeah, they're going.
It is Virginia Tech, yeah.
So you would think in a normal geographic situation, but I think they were Oregon State and them they had played. There was some conflict. There's always going to be situations where you don't want to really put teams that have matched up. That's why you'll never see two SEC teams match up. In a regional, or they try to do that on the front end. But I thought that, in guessing, I was driving back from the Braves game with my kids, and so I was listening to the selection show. I'm sure it had to be a little nerve-wracking. I couldn't follow it because the signal kept pixeling on the interstate. But I didn't realize that we were the last one in the last bracket. You had to know. I'm sure Tim and them knew they were going to get in, but it still it doesn't make things any easier when you've kind of been through what you've been through the last 10 days and then you're in the last grouping. I honestly thought we were going to go to Louisville again, and that when that didn't happen early, I knew there was going to be something probably a little bit screwy compared to years past. But I think overall, if we're talking about the brackets, I can't see how they. North Carolina State and Rutgers, I think, got messed over really badly. I don't know who probably, Ole Miss probably gets in because they swept LSU on that merit alone the week before LSU came here and swept us. But there are some tough decisions that have to be made each year. But I kind of think Rutgers, from reading various boards and stories, it looks like Rutgers and North Carolina State had some pretty big beefs. I don't know what you think, and I've read your article from your other website, the Southeastern 14, but it looks like pretty much that's an agreement for most pundits across the country.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus. I don't know that I have an opinion on that as much. I haven't dug into State's resume, but I know Aaron Fitt certainly did and wrote about it this week. He feels like that NC State had a big gripe. I did talk to somebody on the staff yesterday. They swear they don't know the pairings until they see them on TV with everybody else.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So,
that's and that's probably the way it should be. And at first when I saw the San Diego pairing in that region, I was thinking that there would be a common opponent with Hawaii, but that was San Diego State earlier in the year. That's where those guys just put their head down, the support staff, and try to get as much film. And this is where your connections as a coach from doing this a long time, like Tim Corbin and his crew have done. This is where they reach out and they get spray charts and they get from other coaches and they get video as much as they can. And with all the games being on, a lot of these games being on ESPN Plus and the various streaming services, you can get a lot of that. It doesn't make it easy. But this is when who you speak to at conventions and who you've coached with in the past on USA teams, or who you've been an assistant coach that knows an assistant coach, that's where it helps. And because those things are vital in today's world of the shift being prevalent. It's Vanderbilt that does just as much as anybody, and knowing tendencies. It's hard to believe, but they will have a pretty good feel. All these teams will have a pretty good feel of one another. And real quick, and they'll be able to implement those across the country in these various regions.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. One thing that was interesting yesterday, one of their talking points seemed to be, we love to play on the road. Our guys love to play on the road. And you look at it, this year they went at home. These are all home series. 0-3 against LSU, 0-3 against Tennessee, 1-2 against A&M, 0-1 against Louisville, 2-1 against Florida, 1-2 against Oklahoma State. It's remarkable. I don't think I've ever seen a Vanderbilt team play so poorly at home against the cream of the crop in the league. You know, I was thinking, hey, maybe they catch a break, because I think, to me, far and away, the easiest regional, or the regional host that I thought got the best treatment in terms of getting to host. I feel like East Carolina, Georgia Southern, and Maryland are all a notch behind those other 13. The computers certainly would argue that. I think your hope was, if you're Vanderbilt, maybe you get sent to one of those destinations. That didn't happen. But I will tell you this. One thing that I do wonder, and again, I don't think they got a favorable matchup. I think they're going to be very hard-pressed to advance out of the weekend. But I feel like a lot of times they got bit by the home run ball against some of those teams. And you look at Oregon State this year. Oregon State only hit 50 home runs, only gave up 32. They are going to be playing in a park where home runs don't come cheaply. And that, and this whole, if that whole we love to play on the road thing is legitimate and they can rally behind that, again, I don't perceive them to win this regional. But there are a couple of things there that maybe play to their advantage a little bit, given the way the season played out.
Yeah, and you hear about these coaches will say, a lot of SEC coaches, not just you hear it from Vanderbilt in years past, but it's going to be a breath of fresh air to get out of the league to this, the consecutive weekends in a row, one after the other, the gauntlet, as they call it, that it is hard as the Southeastern Conference. And sometimes you've heard that many times, that you get out of there and it's refreshing to play somebody else you haven't played, or play in an environment that you haven't played in before. And Tim mentioned in a press conference a couple weeks ago, and maybe it was a week ago or before the SEC tournament, how this team, he thinks, cherishes playing on the road, and there is something to it. Having played before, I enjoyed it. I mean, it's a fun thing to get out there and play in some of these different parks and against teams you haven't played before. And now they're on their time now. It's not Vanderbilt's time. I mean, they're not students anymore. The classes are over, and you can do whatever you want to. There's no limits as far as during the week, as far as how they can practice. I know they took 2 days off after the tournament, which was warranted and I think a great idea. But now it's back to business, and just the whole process of traveling, not being around maybe some distractions you might have at home, and seeing that situation as being a positive. I think he's talked about it now twice now publicly, how this team, the enjoyment of being on the bus and being on the airplanes and hotel rooms and late night, not necessarily late night card games, but just watching a game, the NHL playoffs or the NBA playoffs, and you got 30 guys in a room watching it. There's some definite camaraderie about that helps, but it goes from year to year. I mean, this team has some years been unbeatable at Hawkins, and I'm not saying it's a detriment or a swipe at the fans that they don't play well at home. It's just from year to year, you're going to have different groups of personalities that do that. I think overall, generally, you talk to baseball guys who do it, who play, college kids. There's something to be said about that. They're not traveling a bus like single A players and rookie ball. It's a little different than that. These guys have been set up and they're flying and they're living the life better than some double A players maybe in certain situations. So, yeah, I think, and Chris, another thing I'll touch on. I watched in the after the last game against Kentucky in the SEC tournament, and talking about personalities and how that works with players. You know, you when they were talking about this team and they kind of zoomed in on the bench when the game was over with, and there was a pretty direct conversation. Tim gathers them in the dugout after every game. You've seen that before, even in good times and in bad. But if you could you don't have to be a real good lip reader to read some of the comments that he was saying to them about where they are, how they played in that game, where they need to go from there, how they need to flush this game, flush the tournament, and get back in it. Their mindset. But you know, baseball and sports and kids in general have changed so much in the last 20 years, the last 10 years. This is a social media age. It is an age where everything is being thrown at them, and they can get quotes from their coaches and fans and message boards, and the attention span sometimes of these kids is very little, and you cannot, especially with the transfer portal the way it is now. You know, I'll tell a story. I'll digress a little bit here. My former coach, Roy Mewburn, who I think did as well as he could with the resources he had. I mean, the guy was an established coach. Our stadium, it was a joke before they built the Hawk. But he used to give this speech every year, and if you talk to anybody who played for him, we call it the I-65 speech. And the I-65 speech basically was, at some point during the year, if you played horribly or it was going down the tube, he would let everybody know that there's 3 roads that lead out of Nashville. There's I-65, I-40, and I-24. And if you don't like it here, you can get the bleep out. And that maybe worked 20 years ago and 25 years ago because it was a scare tactic, but we knew what he was talking about. And it was his way of saying, let's go. I'm tired of it. If you don't like it, get out of here. Well, my point with the fans trying to figure out here of what's going on, and there's going to be a team meeting. Who's going to be the guy who's going to lead this group, and is there going to be a butt chewing in the locker room, and what can they do? Today's kids are different, and they're just different. And if you give them the I-65 speech and tell them, if you don't like it, get up out of here, they can get up.
They'll take it and land an NIL deal. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's. So that's a very different thing, and you've got to be, and being a fly on the wall. I mean, I've played the game, I've coached the game, and it's almost the John Wooden situation where he was quoted as saying, you know, he told parents that played for his kids, the parents that their kids played for him. He would tell them, you know, I'm not going to treat your kid the same, but I'm going to love them all the same. I'm going to treat this guy differently because this guy can take it, and the other guy can't take the same way that Christian Little, the way you handle him might be different than the way you handle, Tate Colwick, or the way you handle, any of these players on the team. Enrique Bradfield might take a butt chewing differently and so I think because of the way that the world has changed, that you got to be careful. If you're a fan or you're an observer and you're sitting there looking at it going like, well, this team needs to have their butt chewed out, or they need to go run stadiums, it's different because once you go to the well too many times and try to do that, it doesn't work. It's false. The kids sense it. They know that it's false. You got to pick your poison, and you got to pick at the times that you do that. So I think that's where they are in it right now. And they know that these coaches have been doing it for longer and no more than I even begin to know. But looking at where they are in this stage of the season, it's important to understand that sometimes that can be seen as they'll be just ignored. And I think what you're going to see this weekend is you'll know pretty well on early if this team has. I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to be like, well, they're going to drag on, and you'll be able to tell real quickly if this thing's going to and barbecue or this team's going to fight. And if it doesn't work out, you can definitely say, well, it just wasn't their year. This team has the capability, they have the athletes to do it and get it done. But some years it's not in the cards. And I think there won't be a thing where I think you'll know pretty quickly as far as how they're going to react and get off the carpet. And if they don't, it just wasn't their year.
Let's talk San Diego for a minute. San Diego went 36-18, won its conference tournament. Looks like it was 14-9 away and 4-0 on neutral sites. The top of their order looks pretty outstanding. They've got 4 guys: Caleb Ricketts, Chase Meadroth, I think is how you would pronounce it, Kevin Sim, and Jack Costello, who all hit pretty well. They had 3 guys with double digits homers. That would be Sim, Meadroth, and Ricketts, who hit 16. The rest of their lineup looks like it's okay. They've got pretty decent on-base percentages across the board. So that's the thing. They walk a little bit, 236 times as a team. Pitching-wise, they've been alternating between Bryson Motts and Ryan Chrysar as their number 1. I don't know how they play that. Motts is a lefty, had a 4.09 ERA, 83 2/3 innings, struck out 124.
That's
but walked,
impressive, yeah.
and only walked 21. Looks like the home run ball was what bit him. He gave up 14 of those, also 15 doubles and 2 triples. Chrysar, I think, was their number 1 starter the last weekend of the year. He wasn't as effective. 4.77 ERA, 54 2/3 innings pitched, 49 strikeouts, 22 walks. He's a righty. I don't know how San Diego plays that. If they say, hey, if we're going to win the regional, we're going to need to save Motts for Oregon State and bank on beating Vanderbilt. But that's what this team is. It outscored opponents by 114 runs this year. This is a pretty good team and certainly probably one of the better 3 seeds in the field.
Yeah, I mean, they had some impressive wins early. They, open up with Oregon, which is never an easy task, and they win 3 out of 4, and they've had some impressive wins against some NCAA tournament teams. As you mentioned, the tournament that just concluded last week, they win 4 straight. And along the way, again, they had some impressive series wins against some pretty good baseball teams. So they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. It's going to definitely be a matchup deal when they, watching tape, looking at spray charts, looking lefty righty. Because as mentioned, I thought Tim Corbin said exactly what I knew he was going to say when the question was going to be asked. Like, everybody's assuming Carter Holton's the number 1 right now. But you at their point there in the season, the last couple of weeks, you could pick a name out of the hat. And say, well, this guy's the number 1, or this guy should be the Friday starter. I think more so than any years, they could throw whoever they throw Friday night would not shock me. It would not shock me one bit if Mcelveen got the nod. It would not shock me if Holton got it, because they don't really have a definitive number 1. And Tim said, well, we don't put labels like that. I think it was his quote. I think he probably meant on this team. In years past, there's definitely been labels. And so if Holton's your best pitcher, but he doesn't pitch in game 1, it's really not going to shock anybody and it's going to make it look like they're holding him back, because they've done musical chairs pretty much the last couple of weeks and thrown guys that you didn't expect or that wasn't conventional. So I don't think they have to worry about that. Like in years past, when David Price is pitching, you say, well, they're going to hold him back. Well, you knew he was the number 1, and he pitched on Friday night in that regional against Austin Peay. There is some, you've got to wonder in some of these regions, and it happens, and sometimes it can bite a team or two in the bracket if you hold a guy back. Not saying the Vanderbilt will, because like I just mentioned a minute ago, I don't think it'll surprise anybody who starts. But there is some truth to some coaches doing it, saying this is going to be the best chance. I think New Mexico State's terrible. So if I wouldn't be surprised at all if Oregon State did that. I think Oregon State got a pretty good draw, and for a team that, and correct me if I'm wrong, 3 national seed, and they didn't win the conference tournament, and they didn't win their conference regular season title. Is that correct, Chris?
Stanford may have won the regular season.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you're a 3 national seed, and
strength of schedule was a big thing with them.
Right. So, there's a lot of work to be done before you even talk about Oregon State. But I think it's a region they have the ability, if they can do some stuff they did middle of the year, and Enrique can get on base and they can slap the ball around, and their 5 through 9 guys have to come through. They have to, or they're not going anywhere fast. And that's just been the case, the last 5-6 weeks. I mean, if they can play like they did against Ole Miss, they can stick around and have a chance to win this region. If they don't, it's going to be a quick exit. Guys going to the Cape and wherever they're going all over to do that, and they'll be able to get up there pretty quick compared to years past. So it's a formidable region. It feeds into the Auburn region. And on paper, that's something I think that a team out of this region, if it were via Vanderbilt, would not scare most people. I think Auburn's good, but it's a team that you'd be familiar with. But a lot of work to be done, definitely, before we even talk about that.
Stanford did win the Pac-12 despite losing 2 of 3 at Oregon State, all 3 pretty close games. But, yeah, let's talk about the pitching for a minute, because I think Chris Mcelveen has pitched better than his lines have indicated lately. He got no defensive help against Kentucky. Pitched pretty well against LSU till that fell apart pretty late. Has been brilliant at times, had the no-hitter at Kentucky in which he threw 7 innings. McElvain, the issue with him has been walks. He has walked 43 and 79 in the 3rd innings. Now he's only hit 2 batters. Holton has walked 29 and 74 in the 3rd, but he's hit 9, so that evens that out a little bit. But you look, Oregon State has walked 355 times. That's a ton of walks. That's how they beat you. Not so much with the long ball. They've got one guy who hits them a lot. That's Jacob Melton. But their on-base percentages up and down the lineup are 400 plus. In fact, they've got 6 regulars who are over 400 on-base percentage. If you're doing it with the matchups, you got to beat San Diego. But I think their best bet for winning the first 2, and it's a big gamble, might be go to McElvain against San Diego and then go Holton, banking on you win that game and you face Oregon State.
Yeah, I that's the way I would think that it could happen, that it'll go. I mean, you're going with a guy who's been around of those 3 the longest. You just got to hope that he can throw strikes and get to the McElvain of old when how he pitched in the series against Kentucky, because what is alarming again is the walk with the team that walks as much as they do, and he's got 43 and 79 in the 3rd inning. So he's your bell cow. He's pitched more innings than anybody on the staff. Wouldn't surprise me if they tried him out there Friday night. With Futrell, the issue that I noticed with him, and there was some talk, I don't know if the gun was off in Hoover. There was some chatter about that at various sources, but Futrell was consistently 87, and I know he doesn't throw that hard to begin with comparatively. My goodness, I wish I threw 87, but I thought his velocity was a little bit off compared to what he's been pitching, and his curveball was definitely off. Didn't throw it very, very much anyway. He's mainly a fastball change pitcher, and his change is deadly when it's on. But he has not been able to locate his curveball, and thus has not thrown it a lot. Holton, the way through against Ole Miss, if he can replicate that, they got a chance to do some damage, whoever they play in the region when he pitches. But that second game, Chris, is so critical. It's almost like getting the 2 wins in a row is so paramount compared to if you lose one of the first 2, it really doesn't really matter. You still got your path is a hard one to get through. They have the numbers. You got to wonder though with who you're going to get with Christian Little, and if Maldonado still has enough in the tank compared to where he was, compared to this time last year when he's pitching in Omaha, starting a game. And then Christian Little, I think, is the wild card. I mean, I think that kid has all the talent in the world, and when he's on, especially from the windup, as I've talked about in past podcasts. I think he's so much better in the windup than the stretch right now. But he's a guy that, the depth is there. If they were to get in a loser bracket situation, they could get through and have some guys penciled in to get them through. But it is so paramount in these regionals that if you can get the first 2, life is so much easier on you on depth-wise and psychological-wise and rest and all those things are just, those intangibles are so important, and getting the two and then sitting there and have people come and fight up the bracket to get to you.
Here's a stat for you. Oregon State reached base by walks or hit by pitches 412 times.
That's amazing.
In 59 games. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a little West Coast style. If you notice, there's a theme a little bit that, I mean, Hawaii was like that. Your West Coast teams tend to do that more so than the big ball kind of in the Southeast and kind of the Big Ten type ball where they're blasting the ball around the park. It seems like that's not an unusual stat when you compare a lot of those teams.
All right, I'm going to do a little exercise with you. We're going to pick one key hitter, one key fielder, and one key pitcher. I'll start with hitter. What hitter do you think is key in this series? I've got my answer, but I'm going to let you go first so that I don't bias yours.
Let's see. If I'm going to say a guy who is key to have the production for this tournament, for this team to go, hitting wise, I might surprise some people, but I think that Parker Nolan has the ability and where he's positioned in the lineup. If he can have a big weekend, I think it will catapult this team to some good things. But the way he has, it's been sporadic. He's got power to the opposite field, which he's shown a lot. But I would say mine would be just because of where he is in that lineup. If he, that's why it's critical. I'm not worried about Bradfield getting on base. You would like to think that Spencer Jones and Keegan's be able to, show their worth with where they're positioned. But again, I'm looking for those guys 5 through 9. Somebody somewhere has to rise to the top for this team to be able to win this regional, and that's why I pick him.
Okay, I'm going to go Dominic Keegan because Keegan was hitting 400 a month ago.
Yeah,
he's down at 363. Keegan is the kind of guy that can almost carry you to win by himself. He and Spencer Jones. And I think if they get him hitting back, and I'm not trying to be critical of Dom, he had such a fantastic season that eventually that's got to come down to earth. But if Dom Keegan hits like the Dom Keegan of 2 or 3 weeks ago was hitting, that's potentially a game changer for them.
Yeah, and I see your point there. And Spencer Jones is 367, right above him, 4 points higher. But those two guys, that's my thing about Parker Nolan was just expecting that those two guys were going to play up to their capabilities. And so I was kind of using him as the glue at the bottom of the order. But, yeah, I could see that. Those two guys have got to rise to the top. Your experienced guys who played in Omaha, Jones, Keegan, Bradfield. I mean, those guys have got to be able to. And Carter Young, Carter came on a little bit at the SEC tournament. You saw some signs of life, which is important. He played, of course, was a stalwart, and he was hurt last year in Omaha and played through it. But you got to hope that he can improve on, and kind of build on what he did in the SEC tournament, because there were some flashes of some old Carter Young at the plate. So they just got to be able to feel the ball too. I mean, you can't. I mean, you cannot be in a situation where you're booting the ball around and throwing it around like they did in some of the games in Hoover. And if you're going to do that, you're not going anywhere. This team, at minimum, if they pitch and play defense and just have some guys rise to the top, they can maybe make some noise. But if they're not doing that, if they're throwing the ball around, booting it, making plays, not making plays that they should on a consistent basis, all of this talk about the hitting is a moot point.
Okay, key arm for the series, your pick.
I think that I'm not worried about Holton so much, is because I think he's been, you look at his numbers, 92 strikeouts, 29 walks. The way he pitched in Hoover was dynamite. I'm going to have to say it's Mcelveen. I would tend to maybe say Christian Little, just because I believe in the kid's talent. I really do. I know people have coached him in summer ball and Team USA, and I can see it. The talent, it just oozes out of his body. The kid's talent level, it would be because I think he's going to have to pitch in a big way this weekend somewhere. And but if it's, I think McElveen would be the key there. Just the fact that if he does start Friday, which we don't know anything, we're just guessing. Whenever he pitches, you got to be able to get 6, 7, 8 innings out of him of the experience and having been there. So it's a tough decision between those two. I guess I would lean towards McElveen if we assume he starts Friday, which we don't know. But it's one of those two, McElveen and Little, might surprise some people.
Yeah, McElveen was my pick too. I'm similar to you. I kind of count Holton. I mean, and it doesn't work like this, but Holton seems like more of a sure thing at this point. McElveen, the outcomes have been very wide. Again, you've seen him dominate at times. You've seen him struggle at times, although I think a lot of Chris's struggles have come from not getting help in the field from teammates. But McElveen's given up 11 home runs. Again, the park plays maybe a little bit more in his favor with that. It's going to be the free passes, which we talked about earlier. I'll give you 2 honorable mentions. Little was actually the guy I was going to pick at first, too. But there's a chance that by the time Little gets in the game, it's basically decided one way or the other. If those starts don't go well, basically they're going to have to get great starts from McElveen and Holton to have a chance in this thing. So that's where I drew the line with that one. But I'll tell you another one to watch, Devin Futrell, because you mentioned the confidence. When Futrell has got his confidence, he can really pitch. Now, it seemed to me like he was up against a wall where when he faced those elite teams, he couldn't get the outs that he was getting in the midweek. That said, Futrell gave up 8 home runs in 57 and third innings. Again, the park plays more to his favor. He only walked 11 guys this year. And that's a thing where, say they're playing Oregon State in an elimination game, if they can get his confidence back, the fact he doesn't walk a lot of guys to a team that takes a ton of walks, he could end up being a pretty important piece in this too.
Yeah, and if you look at his walk totals of 11, I think 2 or 3 of those were in the SEC tournament. I mean, I think the number was like 8 before the SEC tournament. I could check on that, but I know he walked a couple Tennessee players, which was uncharacteristic. Yeah, I see your point there. He and I've said this to friends casually, and then Tim echoed it. I think there's a big difference between pitching against Tennessee and pitching against Western Kentucky in the middle of the week. The hitters are better. The limelight's out there. The crowd's bigger. It's just heart probably beating a little faster. But he's going to be an important piece this weekend if they get to him. I just don't see, and I don't know if you agree, but I just don't see this team winning it this weekend if they don't win the first one, or definitely the first one.
No, they've got to win the first 2.
They got to win the first 2. You win the first 2, you put yourself in a position with, if Little is still out there awaiting the ball in a game 3 or 4, that's pretty formidable. Or you have, depending on how, what his mindset is that game, you've got, a line of arms sitting there waiting to pitch you through to get to the Super Regional. But I think the staff probably knows it. They got to get to 2 wins as quickly as possible, the first 2, to have a shot.
Key fielding guy for them. I've got mine. Let's hear yours.
Let's see. I mean, I think all year long we've talked about this. We talked about it in February. First and third are the key spots. Where when I say key spots, it's been the question marks all year, and thinking about it over the weekend, first and third have been, especially first, have been musical chairs over there for the last couple years. They really haven't had a guy who's consistently been over there, and third somewhat lately. But they've got to have some consistency there, from Diaz, if it's him, or if it's Nolan, if it's him, to not make those errors that were done. You got to make the simple play. If you don't, things can get out of hand and unravel really quickly. So not knowing who's going to play third this weekend, I'm just going to say the position third. I'm not worried about Carter Young at short. he's had some situations this year where he'd probably like to have, his 10 errors, he's probably going to make 6 normally. There's 4 or 5 that he'd like to have back that he normally would make. But I'll say just in a position that's third, because they got to make the simple play. I'm going to say the position of third base, because we really don't know who that is. But they got to have somebody over there who can make the simple play, who can be counted on not to boot the ball and can be consistent over there. I'm not sure who you're going to pick, but sorry to be vague, as I just don't know who that spot is over there. Who's going to play it?
I'm going to go Carter Young, because when Carter Young is, I hate to almost say this, the only way I can explain him is his routine, his errors come on very routine plays.
Yeah.
Which seems like a matter of focus to me. If he's locked in and playing at the level he can play at, he's outstanding. I think that turning double plays at key times could really be big in this series. You've got to have him fully functional and locked in. I think your third base concern is obviously a valid one. Jack Bolger would be another guy on the list. Oregon State has stolen 74 of 88 times. Bolger's been pretty decent behind the plate a lot of times. I think he's going to have to be the guy that carries a load behind the plate, because Dom Keegan just really has seemed to struggle lately when he's been back there. So to me, that's where it goes. I'm going to give you another key or two as we wrap this up. I think the running game is big for them. You saw teams really stymie Bradfield down in Hoover by, Ole Miss threw over, first 13 times. The first time he reached, it was crazy. I like the thing they did where they sort of had Bradfield and Vaz at the top of the lineup. Vaz gets on base a lot. So does Bradfield. You get those two guys on at the same time, one on first, one on second. The threat of a double steal puts a lot of pressure on the pitcher. That's the other thing I'm watching is like how well can Vanderbilt run in this event, because I think when the lineup struggles to score, and certainly you're going to have your hands full with Oregon State and San Diego, not a bad team when it comes to pitching either, but I think manufacturing runs there also going to be a big thing for them.
Yeah, you got to get Bradfield on, and this is a copycat game. They're going to be teams that are going to do the same thing. It's not like people don't know that he's going to run. But, yeah, it's just getting the consistency of getting those guys on and then having the guys below them, as I've talked about, 5 through 9 slots, 6 through 9 slots especially, where they can knock them in. And I think this is a series. I don't think you'll see musical chairs too much position-wise. They're going to go with the guys that they feel comfortable with. I don't see anybody. Bolger will be behind the dish, I think, every game. I don't see any. I think they pretty much have indicated that's the way it's going to be the rest of the way, just by their lineups. And they're going to have to. Bolger's a good call on the defensive thing too, because the teams that run as much as some of the teams in this region that they're going to face, they're going to have to be. They're going to have to shut it down back there and handle the pitchers as well. So. Yeah, I think those are what we've uncovered there. Some guys who, for different reasons are going to be key components, whether, the throwers, the fielders, and the hitters. And I think we pretty much, I'm in agreement with all of you.
Chip, we've talked for an hour now. Coming off surgery, I feel like I've maybe reached my pitch limit here.
I think we're going to have to go to the bullpen here.
There's other stuff to talk about. The couple times that I have been out and about and was kind of socially active and talking to people, I kind of felt it in my chest later. So I'm gonna call it a day. But I did want to give you a minute to talk about your real estate business. And everything about that, as I know a lot of people are hitting that time of year where they're buying and selling, and you've got a lot of great advice on that.
Sure, Chris, and glad to hear your voice again, and good to have you back on here. I know a lot of people have been concerned, so it's been fun doing this and getting back out here and doing the show. But yeah, Frederick and Clark Realty is our real estate company. We've been around since 1957. Here in Nashville, we got 2 offices, one in Green Hills and one in Brentwood. The market is still, I would term it crazy level. Not as crazy as it's been. I think we've seen some price reductions actually in some areas and a little slight bump in inventory, although it is really low. But some pricing in some select areas have gone down. And when that happens, even in this still crazy market, We recommend you get a licensed realtor, which we have 180 of those in these 2 locations at Frederick and Clark. Give me a call at 615-327-4800, 615-327-4800. I can walk you through the process and hook you up with one of our realtors that specializes in real estate in your area, whether you're buying or selling a home. You need that consultative approach to real estate where we can walk you through the process from if you're selling, putting your housing on the market, staging it, pricing it, which is extremely important compared to other houses in your neighborhood. On the buying side, man, you need the help. I mean, you need to be able to compete with multiple offers, how to write the contract and the terms, and that's where our 180 agents do their work and shine, and we're so proud of them. You can check them out at frederickandclark.com. That's on the web, and you can check inventory of houses in your area. We've got a search engine part of the website. Check out bios of our realtors, and of course, you can call us as well. So give us a call. Give me a call personally, and I'll walk you through it. And thanks for having me on the show. Good to have you back on there, and hopefully with some good news next week, if we can do it again, if you feel like up for it, and we'll see how it goes this weekend.
Yeah, it does feel good to do this again. Again, I'm pretty sure I'm going to pay a price for it later today. Go
take a nap.
There's almost definitely going to be a nap involved. That's just how this goes. But it's good to do it again. And I think next week, maybe we try to have one of these, God willing, either talking about what a super regional matchup looks like or reflecting on the season and where the program goes from here. There'll be something to talk about. Hopefully I have the energy to do it. And if I do, you'll certainly be the guy to do one of those with me.
All right, man. You have a good day. Take care. Get some rest.
All right. Thanks, Chip. We'll talk to you
Chris.
soon.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.